I just sent. All right. Well, good morning. Good morning. How's everything going with you?
It's been busy. Yeah, it's been busy.
Yeah,
Good busy. Yeah.
good. How's everything going with the freight business?
It's coming along. Like we just got a new contract with, I was telling Brian and Jaden that with the airport moving air cargo. So I'm excited about that.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that. Okay. Nice,
Yeah, so
nice.
just really just staying busy. And then, smaller things, trying to help people get some of the smaller contracts that's around.
Mm-hmm.
You really just got to keep your ear to the ground because a lot of people really just don't know where to look when it comes to that, and or a lot of people really try to start big, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't really have the capital to go big like that. So trying to show them how to start small and then scale up from there.
No, I love that. I definitely want to connect you with my nephew. He's looking to start a freight business or not a logistics company, more so transportation of people, like in the like medical transport and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And so,
Yeah, we started a company out in Philadelphia. That's what they got. They're
okay.
doing medical transport, the non-emergency
Mhm.
medical transport,
Non-emergency medical transport. Yeah.
or he could do medical courier. I
Mhm.
mean, there's several different options in that particular arena.
It's funny, like we're having this conversation today, and I actually, when I started doing, well, one of the companies I worked for was Amerisource Bergen, and they had
Hmm.
a subsidiary called World Courier, where we did like transportation of like vaccinations,
Hmm.
um, like laboratory materials and things like that, where it had to be shipped like really sensitive material really quickly. A lot of it was air freight, all of it was air freight.
Yeah.
So we picked up from a lot of the life science companies in California and shipped from out of LAX. And we drive all the way down to San Diego for students or for
Yeah,
uh
that's where we're going coming out of is LAX. The air cargo is a really, I think me and you had talked about it before, but air cargo and like intramodal are probably, if you can get into those are probably the best because they pay so
mhm.
well. Over the road is just really, I mean, you really got to grind. You can make good money on it, but you really got to grind because they're not going to pay as much, especially now with the tariffs and stuff like that. They're not, the prices for over the road rates are just ridiculous. I mean, they're really, really low. So a lot of businesses are looking for other ways to really kind of, and that's what we're going to talk about at the Bell conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited
They
to
see a
hear.
lot of versus just having just a basic, license and stuff like
Hmm. Okay, well, I'm so excited that you're able to join us today. See if people have joined the call. Welcome, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Cotton. I'm the executive director of Black Tech Link. We're a nonprofit based in San Diego. Even though we do serve all of Southern California, so we have offices, satellite offices in the Inland Empire, as well as South Bay, Los Angeles. And I'm excited to be joined by Emmanuel Harris, CEO of 1980 Freight. And I'm excited for today's conversation. So if you're just joining us for the first time, recently we've been doing a lot of workshops and trainings that focus on supporting small business owners, entrepreneurs that are interested in exporting. And we started doing that this year. We've been funded um, by the Governor's Office of Business Economic Development, the Office of International Trade, to provide these workshops for community members, small businesses, entrepreneurs, so they can build up their capacity and know that there are resources for them to export. But before you start exporting, you got to know the lingo, you got to know the language. And that's why I'm excited for today's workshop, which focuses on Incoterms, which is a necessity in this industry. This is the way that the freight industry talks to each other. And so I'm really excited to have Emmanuel lead this conversation today. Um, in the past, we've had workshops that focused on like how to identify like funding resources, financing for exporters. We've had conversations that are talking about the recent changes in tariffs and different like online tools to help you make decisions to export. And so I think it's great that we're following suit with all those conversations, with this conversation today, focusing on Incoterms. Um, but also, before we begin, I know Emmanuel is going to be joining us virtually for this conversation. But if you are in the San Diego area in a couple weeks, Emmanuel will be doing a workshop in person. He'll be doing a workshop that focuses on trucking and contracting, all the certifications that are needed, information, need to know, must haves for small businesses that are interested in like creating their own logistics company to start getting like business and government contracts and like what that looks like. And so I'm excited for him for the conversation today and our upcoming conversation. Um, Let me see. And so yes, I know Emmanuel, I'm going to give you the floor, but please feel free to share any information about yourself.
My name's like she said, Emmanuel Harris. I'm the owner of 1980 Freight. Its mother company is 1980 Companies, so we actually do quite a few things. Up under 1980 Companies is 1980 Freight, 1980 Express, 1980 Creations, and then Harris Recruiting. So we have a lot of entities up under it. Primarily, I've been in the truck and like tech industry for over 12 years. So have a lot of experience in the trucking industry, especially of it. So at the end, my we just got a new office in Carlsbad, physical location. So we're going to start taking appointments and stuff for people as well. But we'll get into that later. But I'm excited about today's presentation.
Yeah, congratulations on your office space. That's always like a big thing to be celebrated. Um, I know there's a couple people on the call. Like, please feel free to share in the chat where you are joining us from. We love to hear from you, what type of business you're in, if you're already exporting, if you're familiar with Incoterms, if it's something new to you, let us know. Right? At this time, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to give the floor to Emmanuel.
All righty, I'm going to bring up the presentation so everybody can, and we'll jump right into it. Let me know if everybody can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, you can see it. Okay, good. So we're going to be talking about Incoterms made easy for exporters and importers. I really tried to make this as simple as possible because I know a lot of people get confused as far as what Incoterms are. So what are Incoterms, right? It's short for International Commercial Terms. It's 11 standardized terms that we use. Now, do not get into Incoterms mixed up with freight terms because they are not the same. All right. Freight terms, there are probably hundreds of freight terms that they use. And when I say freight terms, those are normally terms that are used when you're dealing with like road transportation and stuff like that. So there's terms like the BOL and things like those type of terms. Those are called freight terms, and those are different than these terms. These are specifically for when you're exporting and importing, and they are very important as far as when you're talking about coding and talking about sending things out as well as things that are coming in. And one of the biggest things that you're really going to learn in this is the risk and the cost associated with that, because that's the biggest thing. Like, when do you take possession of the risk, and how much is it going to cost you, and things like that. Key things that we're going to try to answer is who arranges and pays for the shipping, who is responsible for insurance and things like that, when does the risk transfer from the seller to the buyer, and then how they reduce, or how you can reduce confusion, simplifying the globe and prevent costly misunderstandings. All right, these are the 11 terms. They're broken up into 7 terms or rules for any mode of transportation. And then there are 4 that are specifically for sea transportation only. Um, we'll just glance over them right now. We will go more in depth a little bit later on each term, but we'll just go over each term. So then the first one is EXW, which is X Works. All right, FCA, which is free carrier. CPT, which is carriage paid to. CIP is carriage and insurance to. The DAP is delivered at place. DPU is delivered at place unloaded. DDP is delivered duty paid, right? And then we have the FAS, which is free alongside ship. FOB is free on board. CFR, which is cost and freight, and then CIF, which is cost, insurance, and freight. And like I said, we'll go more into each one, what each one means, and then how you can recognize them. I'm going to be honest, for most people, there's only about 3 or 4 of them that you will primarily use. The other ones, most people won't even touch at all. All right, Incoterms are all about transferring 2 things. One is risk, right? What is the risk that's involved in your freight coming from overseas, or you receiving freight that's coming from overseas? When the risk of loss or damage moves from the seller to the buyer. So when you as a importer actually have to take the possession of that particular property, and then how much is it going to cost you as it relates to that, and then the cost, who pays for what along the shipping chain. Once again, we will show kind of that transaction. We have a chart that will show you for each particular term when you are responsible for taking it, as well as when the seller is responsible for taking it as well. And so this is the chart. Now, I know this is a lot of information. We will, Elizabeth, I think I emailed it to you. So this will be available for everyone after the presentation, where you can look at, because it is just a chart for you to have right in front of you. You can always look and see what is the responsibility. We're going to start with the EXW. When you look down, all right, the transfer of risk is at the buyer's disposal, right? So it's going to tell you where the transfer risk really goes, right? It's at the buyer's disposal. So for export packaging, right, the seller is responsible for that. All right. Then it says the loading charges, the buyer, the delivery to port and place, the buyer, right? So when you go down any of these, right, pretty much the buyer is responsible for pretty much everything. The insurance is always going to say negotiable, but a lot of the times, I'm going to be honest with you, you as a buyer are going to end up not going to pay it, right? If it doesn't say seller, they're not going to take responsibility for it. So then that means that you have the responsibility for this particular one. All right. So when you go down and you look at all of these, so it says you're responsible for export of taxes, customs and clearance, origin, terminal handling, charges, loading on cartage, freight charges, insurance you're going to be charged for, destination terminal handling charges, delivery to destination, unloading at destination. So like all of these fees, right, you're going to be responsible for. Why is that important? Well, if you're in the business, right, your cost, your cost is extremely important to you, because how much is it going to cost you to ship out a particular item, right? And then how much is it going to cost you to receive a particular item to come into your particular location? So for each one of these, right, you can see where it shows you where your responsibility would lie. When you go to the next one, the FCA, right, the free carrier, right, the seller is responsible for the export packaging, loading charges, delivery to port and place, and export duty, taxes, and custom clearance. All right. So they're responsible for that as well. And like I said, you'll get a copy of so that you can look over to see. We're going to go a little bit further into actual definition so you can understand each one as well. All right. So the first one, which is the EXW, right? EXW is different than the DDP, right? With EXW, the buyer handles almost everything, which we saw that, right? When we go back to the EXW, we can see where the buyer is pretty much responsible for the cost that is related to everything. Whereas the DDP, right, the seller, right, all the work, even paying the import duties, are responsible for that as well. All right, so let's take a little deeper dive into each term and just get a better understanding of what they mean. All right, with the seller goods available at their premises, the buyer does everything else, meaning loading, export clearance, shipping, etc. That means that you're completely responsible from everything, from the seller's place of location, wherever that shipment may be, all the way till it gets to you, right? You're responsible for everything. An example of that, a US buyer purchases part from a factory in Italy under EXW. The buyer sends a truck to pick up goods from the factory, handles the custom, the right? The risk, the buyer bears risk immediately, even during loading, right? So that means that you're responsible from that particular, for that particular load, all the way from the factory all the way till it gets to your permanent destination, right? The FOB, which is free on board, and this is for, remember, this is under the C only transfer. It says the seller clears the goods and loads them onto the ship at the port of origin. The risk transfers once the goods are onboarded to the ship, right? So then that means that you take responsibility for that particular shipment once it's actually on the ship heading to your particular location. Example is a Chinese seller ships goods FOB. The U.S. buyer arranges ocean trade from Shanghai to L.A. Right, and so we'll show kind of what those type of shipments look like. I do want to bring this up quick. One second. And show you. So I have a contact in China that's someone that I use quite often for our shipments. And so she will normally send me an email that shows where my shipments are going to be coming from. So like here, this is for Shanghai to LA. This was June 5th of last year, but this is from Shanghai to LA, right? It has the amount that it's going to cost for that particular shipment, right? And then it's going to have the Incoterm that we're going to use, right? And then it'll have the shipment date, right? I just wanted to do this real quick because we'll get into kind of when your particular shipments going out as well as your shipment coming in, you want them to look a certain way, all right?
What is really quickly, what does 40HQ stand for? I saw that in there.
Oh, so 40 HQ is the amount, that's the container size. So there's
Okay,
two different,
yeah.
yeah, there's two different container sizes, right? So then you know that you have, so the first price is going to be for the 20 container size, and then the second price is going to be for the 40 container size. So when you're setting it up, I'll give you a prime example. So right here, when it says FOB Shanghai, right? So it would say FOB Shanghai, and let's just say the first container, if it's a 20 container, it would have, let's say, a price of 8,600. Then it would have a forward slash, and then it normally would have a 40 HQ, which lets me know that I could do a 40 container, or it would have the price. So let's just say the 20 container one is 8,600, and the 40 container one is 10,600, right? It would have those two prices so that you could see what those were. And then, of course, like I said, the date, then it has the location that it's going to.
It's been so long since I've worked in freight, but you're like jogging all of my memory back, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, so like it really does. Once you learn them, it actually comes back to you. So like another example, CFI, which is cost, insurance, and freight. The seller pays for freight and insurance named to name port, but risk transfers once the goods are on board. Includes minimum insurance, right? Meaning that you will have to pay very minimum insurance. An example of that, a seller in Brazil sells under CFI to Germany. The goods are insured and damage after loading, the buyer files the insurance claim, not the seller, right? That's for Incoterms that you have to learn, like I said, and that's why that chart, so then you know when do I take possession of this particular item, and then what is the risk that is involved, right? In regular freight, there's not a lot of risk involved as it relates to, because in regular freight, normally you take possession of it once you receive the bill of lading, right? Once you receive the bill of lading, then you have possession of that particular freight, and then you release it once it gets to this final destination. And so if it's coming to you, then that's when it's released from from the from the seller completely. And normally there's just a simple signature that's involved with that. But with importing and exporting, it's a lot different because of one, the distance in which it's coming from, two, all of the red tape that you have to go through, right? In domestic, there's only really one simple thing. You have to have the insurance to cover whatever the cargo is. So let's just say I have freight going from Sarasota, Florida to Dallas, Texas, right? I just need to have the amount of insurance that will cover that particular freight. So let's just say the freight is worth $3 million. And that means that I have to have $3 million in cargo insurance and $3 million in what's called general liability insurance. That means that I'm insured enough to be able to have possession of that freight and move that freight throughout the United States. Whereas with Incoterms, it's a whole lot different because you're paying for the custom clearance. You're paying for it being on board for the ship. You're paying for the insurance. You're paying for the truck to go into the port and pick up your container and then move that container. You're paying for the insurance of that truck to move it. So there's a lot more cost that's involved versus just, like I said, your day to day freight that you have. Any questions? I don't want to go too fast, but any questions on anything? Right. So then the next one, DDP, delivered duty paid. This bears all the costs and risk, including import duties until goods arrive at the buyer's door. This is probably the best one that you could possibly get, right? Because there's very little risk for you in getting the product. An example of that is seller in France delivers medical devices to a hospital in Canada under DDP. They pay Canadian import duties and deliver to the hospital dock. All right. I do want to go over um, the terms a little bit more in depth so that you know what they are. So these are all the 11 terms. I'm going to give the definition. And once again, this is a PDF that will be available for you as well after we get done. But it has the definition, the seller's responsibility, um, or who uses this particular term, and then I try to give an example. I'm not going to go over the examples for everyone, but I do want to go over the definitions so you know what they are. So the EXW or X works, right? Seller makes goods available at premises or another named place, right? So that is the definition, is that the seller makes the goods available at whatever location they say that is available, right? The seller's responsibility is minimal, right? So because they're not really paying anything, right? Only responsible for packaging and making goods available. So that means that if they're at a facility, their responsibility is just to package those facilities and make them ready at the dock for you to pick up. Once you pick them up from the dock, everything else is on you, right? That's why the buyer's responsibility is all transportation, for the importing due and rich from the point of pickup is set on you. That is a lot for a lot of buyers to do. That's one that honestly, if you could stay away from it, I would say try to stay away from it, but sometimes it's not possible, right? The use case when the buyer is capable of handling all logistics, right? You have to be in a position that you can handle all the logistical work that comes with the EXW, right? Meaning that you're with customs, you're familiar with exporting and importing, you're familiar with, like I said, right? Because you have to remember that this is coming to the port a lot of the time. So that means, so then you have to have the right truck to be able to go into the port and pick it. Then that it's either going to the rail yard to your facility, right? So then you have to have the logistical setup for that to work for you as well. So that one, like I said, is a lot of work, and you have to make sure that you are set up to be able to handle it, right? The FCA, which is free carrier, the definition is the seller delivers the good to a carrier or another person nominated by the buyer at the seller's premises or another named place, right? The seller's responsibility is export clearance and delivery to carrier, right? One, because that means that you don't have to worry about the exporting part of it, right? And then they'll make sure that that package or that delivery gets to you, right? The buyer's responsibility is the main carriage, important duties, and delivery beyond the agreed point, right? Useful for containerized shipping, right? So if you do a lot of containers and not knowing where everyone is in their business because everyone's business is different. Um, but honestly, if you're using containers, that means that you're shipping quite a bit of stuff from the United States overseas, right? Containers are really, really big. So they hold a lot of weight. So if you're using containers, then that means that you're shipping quite a bit, right? CPT, carriage paid to pays for carriage to the named destination. The seller's responsibility is delivery and transportation costs to the destination. The buyer's responsibility is import duties and risk after delivery to first carrier. Common in multimodal transportation scenarios. Multimodal transportation scenarios means so let's just say it comes by the ship and then it has to go to the rail, right? That's a multimodal type of transportation scenario. It came through the ship, it goes to the port. From the port, it goes from the port to the rail yard, which is called normally an intermodal. And then from intermodal, it goes to another rail yard. And then from that rail yard, it's picked up by a carrier normally delivers it to your final destination. So multimodal is anytime is more than was one particular way that it's going to be moved to get to your particular destination, right? That's what it's most common for.
I have a
CIP, which is, yeah, go ahead.
question. So for the previous one you were talking about, a CPT, are you supposed to like name like where, like name like which mode of transportation like the buyer will assume responsibility or the seller will assume responsibility?
You don't have to, because it's in this particular buyer's responsibility. So you accept risk after the first carrier. So meaning, and then it went to the port, right? That's the first carrier. So one of your carriers is going to have to pick it up from the port. So that's when you would assume responsibility for it, right? So whatever the first carrier is, that's when you take responsibility for that particular one. So it could be when it gets from, let's just say, from their warehouse to the shipping dock, right? To the shipping dock, you can just whatever that first carrier is, that's when you take responsibility for it, and that's when all risk kind of falls on you. But it won't be. I guess it to your question, it won't necessarily be mentioned, but you'll know. Like if you're doing a CPT, you kind of know because you'll have your documentation that shows you where its first stop will
Mhm.
be, where the first pickup will be, and you'll know from there that that's your responsibility. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
And so CIP is like CPT, but the seller also provides insurance for this one. The DAP delivered at the seller delivers goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer on the arriving means of transportation. Right? The seller's responsibility, full transport chain, the buyer's responsibility, unloading and import clearance. The seller manages the logistics, right? This is one that a lot of people starting out, your team is not going to be huge, right? To start off with, or maybe it is. I don't know. This, yes, you could probably handle more, but starting now, this is very manageable for a lot of people to have a D. And then two, the risk is very, very minimal for the buyer. You're not um, responsible for a lot. Hold on, I want to make sure I answer any questions. All right. So then you have DUP, which is delivered at place, unloaded, right? It's the same as the DAP, but the seller also handles unloading. Right? That means that the seller is responsible fully for the unloading of the cargo as well, right? The buyer's responsibility is import clearance and duties, right? Helpful when goods are delivered to a warehouse or terminal, right? DDP is delivered duty paid. Seller delivers the goods to the destination and pays all duties and taxes. Full responsibility includes import clearance and duties. The buyer's responsibility is normally unloading unless agreed otherwise. You can negotiate them and ask them if they take responsibility for the unloading as well. Um, Maximum seller responsibility, idle for time, less experienced buyer. Right? Getting into the importing would be great for you, right? Because there's no risk for you. It's just basically understanding what this term actually means, right? So the seller would have responsibility for everything. So DDP would be great. All right. Then remember there's 7 terms that's for all modes of transportation, and then there's 4 terms that's specifically for sea, inland, and waterway transport only. Now, I want to bring up the modes of transportation so that you can see the different modes of transportation that are available, right? So then you have maritime or ocean freight, right? Used for intermodal shipping or large volumes, common for containers, bulk cargo, vehicles, and machinery, right? You've probably seen and people don't recognize it if you've ever been on the highway, seen the railroad tracks on the side, and you see large equipment on those. and things like that. Those are the type of ocean type of freight that's moved, right? Normally, really, really large items that normally can't be moved as a regular over the road. What most people are common to our road transportation, what they call over the road. That's when you see the trucks. Right now, there are several different types of trucks that are available. We're not going to get into that, but there, if you want to have a conversation about that, we can later. But there are several different types of trucks that are available because some trucks can move machinery, but it has to be within a certain weight class. But that's what most people are familiar with, the over the road type of truck things. Rail transportation, right? Cost efficient for bulk goods and long distance over land, commonly used for agricultural products and containers, right? Intermodal, as me and Elizabeth was talking earlier, intermodal is just a great um, mode of transportation to get into if you can. One, a lot of people don't realize how cost efficient it is to use intermodal over the road. That's for one reason. And then two, if you're on the side of where you're moving a lot of intermodal freight, you can make some really good money as well. Um, one, it's the fastest mode for long distance international shipping, right? Best for time sensitive, lightweight, or high value. Air freight is used quite often. It's Amazon is able to get your packages to you at 4 a.m. in the morning because they use air freight. It's a very efficient way to move freight rather quickly. So it's another great one to use. Multi modal transportation is what we were talking about. The use of two or modes under a single contract. Example, sea plus truck or rail plus air, right? So if you have a combination of these modes, that's your multimodal transportation mode. Intermodal transportation also involves multi-modes, but each has its own contract, same container throughout the transport. Now, intermodal transport, the way that it would been, that it has its own contract. So let's just say you have a container that came from the port, all right, and it goes from to the rail, right? That's one single contract by itself, right? That's something that you would negotiate specifically for that particular route. Then when it got to the rail yard, right? So then it would have to go from the rail yard. It would stay in that same container. There wouldn't be any breaking up of the product, but it would go from the rail yard onto the back of a truck, right? And then from the rail yard on the back of the truck to its final destination, that's another contract, right? So that's how that intermodal transportation works. Is that so? At the rail, however it gets from the rail yard, because it could be air as well. It could be air and rail. So that means that it could come in on a container and then it's put onto a container, put on the rail, it goes to the rail yard. That's one complete contract, and then from the rail yard to its final destination is another contract. Um, it's another good form of way to, and then it's also cost efficient as well. Once again, you have to be moving quite a bit of freight for this to really make sense, right? As far as you're not just moving one or two packages. You're not going to use intermodal to move one or two packages. You're going to move, you know, probably large quantities of containers. You want to be moving large quantities for it to be cost efficient for you. Inland waterways is transport rivers, canals, or lakes, ideal for heavy or bulk um, coal grains and things like that. Pipeline used to transport liquid or gases, natural gases, water, or chemicals. And then you have the newest form, which is drone delivery, is a small scale deliveries often for e-commerce or medical supply remote. As well, you will get them in a PDF so that you can look at them as well. So those are the different modes. So remember the first 7 terms are for all modes of transportation, right? And then the next 4 terms, they're for sea and inland waterway transportation only. So FAS, which is free alongside ship, the seller delivers when goods are placed alongside the ship, right? Export clearance and delivery alongside vessels, right? The seller's responsible for that. The buyer is responsible for loading, main cartage, insurance, and import clearance, right? So you want to make sure on those that you see those, all right? The use for that is bulk or non-containerized cargo. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So when you say alongside the ship, does that just mean like when it's just at the port in the yard waiting to get on the
Yes.
ship?
Yeah, that's what it means. It's just when it's in the port, in the yard, waiting to be um, put onto a particular vessel. That's what it means.
Got it. Okay.
All right. The FOB, which is free on board, right? The seller delivers when goods are on board the ship, export clearance and loading on ship, buyer's responsibility, main cartage, insurance, and import clearance, right? Traditional shipping of bulk cargo. And then you have the CFR cost and freight. Seller pays for transport to the named port of destination. Delivery and freight is the seller's responsibility. The risk for the buyer is risk after loading, insurance, and import duties. And then the last one is cost, insurance, and freight, which is the CIF. Like the CFR, but seller arranges insurance, delivery, freight, and insurance is for the seller, and then the risk after loading and import clearance is for the buyer. So choosing the right term, right? So then that's a question. So like that was a lot of information, right? That's a lot to kind of look at. That's why I said with the chart, it's going to help. We'll go back over the chart a little bit here, but it's just a lot of information as far as knowing what should be used and how it should be used for you. All right. So how to choose an Incoterm. When selecting the right term, ask these questions. What transportation mode are you using? Right. That's the first thing that you need to know. What type of transportation do you need, right, to be able to get your product either from your location overseas or to you, right? That's very, very important. Um, so if you're shipping to, let's say you're shipping to China, right? And let's just say you have a container. So you know you if you have a warehouse, so then you have to get that container from your warehouse, right, to the port, right? And then from the port onto a ship, and then or by rail, right? So that it can be sent over to China, and then what will it look like once it get there, right? So what modes of transportation are you going to need? Who can best manage custom clearance? All right. Dr. Jackson, if you've been to any of the sessions that she has, she talks primarily about being a custom broker. I believe, Elizabeth, weren't you a custom broker as well? But
I was not officially a customs broker, but I did work for an NVOCC firm, a non-vessel operating common carrier, where we worked quite a bit with customs brokers.
yeah, so then you would want to find you a custom broker.
Mhm.
That's what I tell people, honestly. Don't try to navigate it yourself, right? Work with someone who does this on a day to day basis, right? I've had so many people call me and they've messed up because
Mhm.
they don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know how to handle customs. They don't really ship overseas a whole lot. But because they're trying to keep themselves some money, they figure, oh, I can just Google it or I can just do it myself. It's not that hard. I can put it in Chat GTP and it'll tell me how to do it. And I'm telling you, that is um, one of the things that I tell people is that one thing that Google cannot give you, one thing that Chat GTP can't give you is experience, right? It
Mhm.
can't give you the experience that comes with someone who's been doing it for years and they actually know the ins and out. They know what to do. They know the terms better. Google is just going to give you a generalization. It's not going to give you the experience that you need. So then, who can best manage custom clearance? I would say find you a customs broker. That customs broker also will help you with making sure that you identify the right Incoterms, right? That you're not documenting those terms as well. Who should
Yeah,
bear the risk at each stage? Go ahead.
I just want to add to that. Like, I know sometimes when people hear, oh, if I want to ship overseas, I got to find a customs brokers. Well, a lot of times shipping companies may have like a customs broker on staff, or they
Hmm.
may utilize like a customs house to be able to ship things overseas. And so it may not necessarily be like I have to go and find a customs broker, but if you are looking to ship, you can work with like I mentioned, a non-vessel operating common carrier, NVOCC, or a freight forwarder. That's what they're called also.
Right.
Utilizes like a customs, like somebody's customs license to ship. And so, like, just try to identify like a freight forwarder who's utilizing it. They could be a customs broker themselves, or they could be utilizing a customs house to be
Yeah.
able to ship.
And a lot of them, honestly, if because we talked about it, you and Dr. Jackson talked about it in the last session. A lot of them will do a consult for free. They're not going to charge you,
Mhm.
just to consult you, just to give you to point you in the right directions and say, hey, this is what you can do. But I do tell people that you do need to consult someone. Just don't, especially if it's your first time. And like you said, find you a freight forwarder. You'll find you someone who can help you at least navigate your first few times, so that you have a better understanding of how things work. Especially when he talks about the next one, who should bear the risk at each stage. Like you want to know, like what is your responsibility at each stage of that shipment, and then what's the buyer's capability at the destination. Like what can you do um, as it relates to getting that product to you? Common misuse is be careful. Um, they don't cover the transfer of title, which is ownership, right? So the Incoterms don't deal with ownership. It just deals with the risk and the cost for moving that particular item, right? You would have to have your own contract in place with the particular seller, and the seller would have to have one with you as well, as far as the ownership of it. Normally, now that is what is known as a bill of lading, because the bill of lading will transfer ownership from one party to another party, right? And normally, those documentations are with the shipment as well. So as you're moving your shipment, right, there's paperwork that goes with it, right? If there's things that your drivers will need, there's things that the port will need to make sure that you have possession of those particular documents, right? It doesn't, Incoterms don't replace a full sales contract, right? So you need to have contracts in place for whatever you're selling. So especially if you're selling things overseas, if you're selling things in China, if you're selling things in Africa, right, you want to have contracts in place, right, so that you can be able to navigate your business, right. I know that Black Tech Link offers also availability to consult you and things like that as well, so they can probably help you as well. We can help you as well. 1980 Freight can help you with contracts if you don't have templates and things like that to use. And then it does not um, deal with defining payment terms, right? So when you talk about payment of the product, payment of different items and things like that, payment of the insurance and things like that, Incoterms don't deal with that. That's not what it's for. Incoterms are primarily for to show you when you take possession of risk, as well as um, what the cost will be, particularly for that. All right. Any questions? All right. So then the proper use for Incoterms, all right, always use Incoterms directly in documents. So any documentation that you have, any email that you use, anytime you're talking about Incoterms, there's a certain format in which you want to use those Incoterms for, right? That format looks a lot like this. So this would be the Incoterm itself, and then whatever port or wherever it's going to be originating from. All right. So this is FOB, Port of Shanghai, right? So that's where it's going to originate from. It's originating from um, the Port of Shanghai. Now, it could be going to a port in the United States, but there's several different ports, but you want to deal with the original port of or original destination of where it's coming from, right? DDP 1100 Park Avenue, New York, right? You want to make mention of these Incoterms, like I said, in anything in purchase orders and sales agreements and bills of lading, right? Invoices, you want to make sure that you label those in there. All right. So what have we covered? Incoterms define delivery responsibilities in trade. There are 11 terms, right, based on transport mode and risk. You should always, like I said, document those terms, all right? And then remember that they don't give you ownership. They don't deal with payment, right? Those are things that you are to have in a contract between you and the seller or you and a buyer, right, beforehand. But these terms will help you as far as navigating or um, moving that freight to where it needs to be. Any questions? I want to go back over real quick this particular chart because, like I said, I think that this is probably one of the most important pieces in knowing what will happen as far as when you have to take responsibility for risk. But before I do that, just are there any questions at all? All right, so no questions. So then if we go with the Incoterms, right? The EXW, we know that pretty much you're responsible for everything. The FCA, we see that the seller takes responsibility for a few things. One of the best ones, though, like I said, really starting out for you as a buyer, what you would want to do is the DDP or the DPU, right? Very limited risk for you, right? So the DDP, the only thing that you're responsible for is the loading, the unloading at destination, meaning that you pay for the cost of whatever it is for them to unload those particular products after you get done, after it reaches your final destination. All right. But this chart is really handy because, like I said, you can just immediately look over and see it, and then you'll be able to know kind of what is your responsibility and what it will cost you. I will say this: um, make sure that you know what your capability is as it relates to shipping, because one of the biggest mistakes that people make is really not weighing the cost of it, especially when we talk about now. Am I saying that it's super expensive? It can be if you're shipping large quantities of items, but if you're shipping, no matter how big or small your business is, you can ship overseas, right? You can send products overseas and you can get products that come to you overseas. It doesn't matter the size of your business. But what does matter though is making sure that you have counted the cost of it, right? Because it can get expensive, right? And so it has to be cost efficient. It has to make sense. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you're manufacturing product here in the United States, right, and let's just say that it's costing you, you know, $5 to make that particular item here in the United States, right? You don't want it to cost you $4.50 to ship that particular item, right? Because your profit margin is not going to be great, right? So in logistics, you want to make sure that you're looking at what does it cost me to make this particular product, especially when we're talking about shipping. What does it cost me to make this particular product and then ship this particular product so that I would have a profit margin? If you're talking about receiving, then what is it going to cost me to get this product to me? And then in a lot of cases is that how am I upcharging or reselling that product so that I can make somewhat of a profit based off of what it costs me in shipping, right? That's why I say that those things are important, especially looking at this particular chart. You want to look at it and know what's the risk, right? What is the cost as it relates to all of these things? And so that's why it's important. Like I said, getting started, um, the DAP, DPU, and DDP are probably your best options in getting started. And those would be the ones that, like I said, I would use to start off with.
I appreciate you sharing this. When I worked in exploring my first job, we had like a card next to us that would help like the freight forwarders be able to kind of understand like what those Incoterms were using for each shipment. And so I do appreciate that.
Yep. So then I want to give one other example, and then we can be open up for questions. So of what you'll see, like what does it look like, right? So like I said, once again, it will have FOB to Shanghai, and then it has all of these other. It can come from any one of these ports, right?
Mhm.
And then it'll say to LA or LB or Oakland or Seattle or Tacoma, meaning that it can go to any one of these ports. I mean that it can be delivered to any one of those ports, but it's FOB Shanghai, and let's just say it's going from FOB Shanghai to LA, right? And then it has, once again, the US, which is the first amount is going to be for a 20-foot container, right? And so normally you'll see it'll say either the amount or it may say 20 GP, right? You may see that, or it'll say 20 GP. It won't have the amount, but it'll say 20 GP, and you know that that's just a 20-foot. Then it'll have the forward slash, and then it'll have normally the price for a, right? So normally you'll see either a 40 GP or as we saw the upper one, or you could see a HQ, right? 40 HQ. And you know that that's for a 40-foot container. But this is what the sequence should always look like. You should have the Incoterm first, right? Then whatever port it could originate from, right? And then whatever port would be the destination, right? And then you would have the amount for a 20-foot container and the amount for a 40-foot container. And then after that, if you wanted to, some of them will put the date, right? They'll put the day, which because all of these particular containers were going on the same date, the validity was the 31st of March, right? So that's what you want to make sure that you um, when you're labeling them, that's what it should look like. It should have all of that information in there. Any questions?
No, this was really great information, and I appreciate you breaking down like just Incoterms and freight terms. It is a lot. But I appreciate you sharing how when you are looking to ship overseas or import overseas and you want to start having that conversation with the buyer or the seller, right? You have to know these Incoterms because you need to know who's going to assume the risk during that transit period, right?
Right.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this with our network, but I'm also going to share um these documents, the freight terms, and also that card. I'll send it out to my network so that everyone can kind of have that handy if they are looking to ship. And this also helps too, like when you do go and talk to a shipper or freight forwarder, customs person, right? You kind of have an idea of what these Incoterms mean too. When I was working in the freight industry, oftentimes it was CIF, X Works, and DDP that I
Mhm.
saw a lot. So,
Yeah,
and
you'll see CIF. You'll see a lot of, and DDP. You'll see a lot of DDP. Honestly, because it's convenient, especially for smaller, medium-sized companies, right?
mhm,
That's not doing heavy shipping. They don't really use. They don't have works really, really well because you're just responsible for aspect of it, and so that cost is normally manageable for a lot of people. But like I said, these I sent you the PDF, Elizabeth, so you can distribute it how you want for this, as well as the chart that shows when the risk responsibility, as well as
mhm.
the modes of transportation, like the different modes of transportation, so people can know what mode they would need to choose from as far as getting started. And then also for us, I didn't put it up there, but our information is available. Um, I can put it in the chat, or I can
Yeah,
share
please
your
put your
screen.
information in the chat. At this time, I want to ask if anyone has any questions. Also, please go ahead and feel free to share in the chat. Um, I am also going to include, let me see, let me pull it up right now. Um, I'm going to share a link if there are any small business owners that need more support with exporting or want to just, need any support regarding their small business. Our organization is funded by the state of California Governor's Office of Business Economic Development, specifically the California Office of Small Business Advocate to support small businesses and nonprofits that are looking to grow and sustain their business. We work with a lot of consultants like Emmanuel to provide these services for free. And so I do, if you are interested, please feel free to schedule some time to chat. I put my Calendly link in the chat. And yeah, give me one moment.
So, and my information was on the screen there for a short period of time, but I will put um, our phone number in the chat as well as my email address that you all could, if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Well, I'm going to conclude for today, and I appreciate everyone for joining us.